Our family priest was blackmailing us for years. Then I discovered why for 5 years. Our beloved family priest had been blackmailing my parents, demanding money and control over our lives. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe and like, it really helps the channel grow. Thank you. I'm walking into the diocesan office right now to meet with the bishop and present evidence that our parish priest, Father Michael, has been blackmailing my family and at least 11 other families in our church for years, systematically recording confessions and using the information to extort money and control people's lives while maintaining a secret second family in another state. My name is Thomas, and I'm 28 years old, and 3 months ago, I accidentally discovered my father has given Father Michael over $300,000 in the past 5 years, and when I investigated why, what I found exposed a predator who'd been hiding behind his collar and abusing the trust of an entire community. I need to start by explaining our family's relationship with Father Michael, because you need to understand how deeply he was embedded in our lives to grasp the full betrayal. Father Michael became our parish priest 8 years ago and immediately became beloved in our community. He was charismatic and kind. He did outreach to poor families. He counseled couples through marriage problems. He was there for people during crises. Everyone trusted him completely, including my family. My parents are deeply religious Catholics who attend Mass every week and have always been active in the church. They considered Father Michael not just their priest, but a close family friend. About 5 years ago, I noticed my parents started having money problems. Nothing dramatic, but concerning. They'd always been financially comfortable. My dad owns a small business and my mom's a teacher. They live modestly and save responsibly. But suddenly they were stressed about bills. They sold their second car. They stopped taking vacations. They seemed constantly worried about money. When I asked what was wrong, they'd brush it off, saying business was slow or expenses were high. I believed them and didn't push further. I was in graduate school at the time and busy with my own life. Looking back, I feel guilty for not investigating sooner. The discovery happened 3 months ago, completely by accident. I was visiting my parents for Sunday dinner and my dad's office door was open. He usually keeps it locked, but must have forgotten. I walked past and saw stacks of papers on his desk. I'm naturally curious, so I glanced at them and saw what looked like bank statements and letters. One letter in particular caught my eye because it was handwritten and sitting on top of the pile. I picked it up and started reading. It was from Father Michael. The letter was dated 2 weeks earlier and said something like, "I understand times are difficult, but our arrangement must continue. I trust you can find the $15,000 we discussed for this month. The Lord provides for those who are faithful. Your family's secret remains safe with me as long as we continue to work together in good faith." It was signed Father Michael with a small cross next to his name. I was completely confused. What arrangement? What secret? Why was Father Michael asking my father for $15,000? I started looking through the other papers and found bank statements showing regular transfers of money. Sometimes $10,000, sometimes $20,000, sometimes more, going back years. All to an account I didn't recognize. There were dozens of letters from Father Michael, all with similar language. Veiled threats wrapped in religious terminology, trust, faith. Secrets remaining safe. I felt sick. Was Father Michael blackmailing my father? But for what? I confronted my dad immediately. I took the letters downstairs where my parents were in the kitchen and put them on the table and said, "What is this? Why are you giving Father Michael so much money?" My dad's face went completely white. He looked at my mom and she started crying. They both looked terrified and broken. My dad said, "You weren't supposed to see that. Please put those back and forget about them." I said, "No, tell me what's going on. Is he blackmailing you?" My dad broke down and admitted yes. Father Michael has been blackmailing us for 5 years, and we've given him over $300,000, and we can't stop paying or he'll destroy our family. My parents told me everything through tears and shame. It started 5 years ago when my dad went to confession. He made a terrible mistake. He'd had a brief affair with someone from work. It lasted only a few weeks before he realized what he was doing and ended it. He was racked with guilt and went to Father Michael for confession, seeking absolution and guidance. During confession, my dad told Father Michael everything. The woman's name. When it happened, how guilty he felt, how he wanted to make things right with my mom. Father Michael listened and then said he would pray for my dad and that God forgives those who truly repent. My dad left feeling somewhat better, believing his confession was protected by the sacred seal. 2 weeks later, Father Michael called my dad and asked to meet privately. They met at the church rectory, and Father Michael said he'd been praying about my dad's situation and felt called to help guide him through this difficult time. But such intensive spiritual counseling required resources. He suggested my dad make a donation to a special church fund that Father Michael managed for counseling and outreach. $10,000 would be appropriate for the level of guidance needed. My dad was confused, but Father Michael made it sound like a normal arrangement. Wealthy parishioners often made large donations for special counseling. My dad agreed and wrote a check. A month later, Father Michael asked for another donation, this time $15,000, again framing it as necessary for the ongoing spiritual counseling. My dad was starting to feel uncomfortable, but Father Michael was his priest, and he trusted him. He paid it. Then the requests kept coming. Every month, Father Michael would ask for money. The amounts varied, but averaged $10,000 to $20,000 a month. When my dad finally said he couldn't afford to keep paying, Father Michael dropped the pretense. He said it would be unfortunate if my mother learned about the affair, that such knowledge could destroy their marriage, that my dad's reputation in the community and his business would suffer if word got out. He never explicitly said, "I'm blackmailing you," but the threat was clear: pay, or I'll tell everyone your secret. My dad felt trapped. The affair had been a horrible mistake that he deeply regretted. My mom didn't know, and finding out would devastate her. They'd been married for 30 years, and my dad loved her. He couldn't bear to hurt her like that. So he kept paying. He drained their savings, took out loans, sold assets, all to keep Father Michael quiet. He lived in constant fear and shame for 5 years. The financial stress was destroying them, but my dad felt he had no choice. If he went to the police, Father Michael would just say my dad was lying to avoid paying legitimate donations. It would be his word against a priest's word, and who would believe him? If he told my mom why he needed the money, he'd have to confess the affair anyway, which was what he was paying to avoid. He was completely trapped in Father Michael's scheme. I was furious and heartbroken, furious at Father Michael for such evil manipulation, heartbroken for my parents who'd suffered in silence for years. I told them we had to go to the police, that what Father Michael was doing was criminal blackmail. But my dad said, no, we have no proof, just letters that could be interpreted as voluntary donations. And going public means your mother finds out about the affair anyway. We've lived with this for 5 years. We can live with it longer, but I couldn't accept that Father Michael had weaponized the sacred seal of confession, had betrayed every principle of his priesthood. He needed to be stopped, not just for my parents, but because if he'd do this to them, he'd do it to others. I started investigating on my own. I went through all the letters and bank statements my dad had kept. I noticed the account number Father Michael had people send money to wasn't a church account. I traced it and found it was a personal account in Father Michael's name. That was evidence the money wasn't going to the church. I also started discreetly talking to other families in our parish, asking if anyone else had financial troubles or seemed to have unusual relationships with Father Michael. I had to be careful not to reveal what I knew, but I dropped hints and asked questions over several weeks. I identified 3 other families who showed similar patterns: sudden financial problems, stressed relationships with Father Michael, secretive behavior. I approached one of these families, the Johnsons, who I know my whole life. I told them I knew Father Michael was blackmailing my parents, and I suspected he might be doing it to others. Mrs. Johnson broke down immediately and admitted yes, Father Michael had been blackmailing them for 3 years. Her husband had confessed to Father Michael that he'd had a gambling problem years ago and had briefly embezzled from his employer before paying it back and getting help. Father Michael had used that confession to extort over $100,000 from them. They'd been living in fear, just like my parents. With the Johnsons willing to work with me, we approached 2 more families and found the same pattern. Father Michael had systematically recorded confessions or memorized details and was blackmailing at least 4 families that we knew of. We decided to go to the police together, strength in numbers. We compiled all our evidence, the letters, the bank records, the testimony from multiple victims, and filed a report. The detective we spoke to was initially skeptical of priest blackmailing. Parishioners sounded far-fetched, but the evidence was substantial, and the fact that multiple unconnected families had the same story made it credible. They opened an investigation. The investigation revealed Father Michael's scheme was even larger than we thought. The police found 11 families total that he'd been blackmailing, some for years, using information from confessions or private counseling sessions. The total amount extorted was over $2 million. The police also discovered Father Michael had a secret second family, a woman and 2 kids living in another state that he'd visit on his days off. He'd been living a complete double life, using blackmail money to support 2 households while maintaining his image as a devoted celibate priest. The hypocrisy was stunning. When police confronted Father Michael with the evidence, he initially denied everything, claimed the money was voluntary donations. that the families were lying, but the bank records showed the money going to his personal account, not church accounts. His letters had threatening language. Victims testified to explicit blackmail conversations, and police found recordings. Father Michael had actually recorded some confession sessions, which is a violation of canon law and in our state illegal. Wiretapping, he'd recorded people's most private confessions to have evidence for blackmail. The recordings sealed his fate. There was no denying what he'd done when his own recordings proved it. The scandal exploded in our community. Our church had trusted Father Michael completely, and learning he was a predator who'd been systematically victimizing families for years was devastating. Some people didn't want to believe it, said the families must be lying, but the evidence was overwhelming. The diocese removed Father Michael immediately and began their own investigation. They found he'd been transferred from another diocese 5 years ago after vague complaints they hadn't fully investigated. He'd been doing this before, and the church had just moved him, giving him access to new victims. The institutional failure to protect people was almost as appalling as Father Michael's crimes. Father Michael was charged with multiple counts of extortion, blackmail, wiretapping, fraud. His trial was 6 months ago, and he was convicted on all charges. Victims testified about the financial and emotional devastation his blackmail caused, families that had lost their savings, marriages that had been strained, people who'd suffered in silence for years. The judge was harsh in sentencing, giving Father Michael 15 years in prison and ordering him to pay restitution to all victims. He's also been defrocked by the church, permanently barred from any ministerial function. His secret family came to the trial and was shocked to learn about his crimes and his double life. They were victims too, in a way, having been lied to for years. My parents' marriage nearly didn't survive. Once the blackmail was exposed, my dad had to tell my mom about the affair that had started it all. She was devastated and felt doubly betrayed, first by my dad's affair, even though it was years ago, then by Father Michael's manipulation of their family. They went to counseling and are slowly rebuilding trust. My mom says she understands my dad was victimized by Father Michael, but she still has to process the original betrayal. It's complicated and painful, but they're working through it. The other victim families are going through similar struggles. Secrets that Father Michael weaponized are now out in the open, causing pain, even as justice is served. Our church community is also healing. Many people feel betrayed by an institution they trusted. There are calls for reform in how confessions are handled, for better screening of priests, for more accountability. The diocese has implemented new policies, but trust once broken is hard to rebuild. I've personally struggled with my faith after seeing how someone could use religion as a weapon. I'm working through it in therapy, but it's changed my relationship with the church forever. What I learned from this nightmare is that predators can hide anywhere, even behind sacred robes and trusted positions. Father Michael used his role as priest to access people's deepest secrets and vulnerabilities, then weaponized that access for personal gain. I learned that systems designed to protect, like the seal of confession, can be corrupted and used to harm. We need better safeguards. I learned that coming forward, even when you're scared, is essential because predators rely on victims. Staying silent. If my dad had gone to authorities immediately, or if previous victims in Father Michael's old diocese had been believed, he couldn't have hurt so many people. And I learned that recovery from spiritual abuse is uniquely difficult because it damages not just your trust in a person, but your trust in institutions and faith itself. If you're being blackmailed by someone in a position of religious authority, please know it's not your fault, and you can come forward. What they're doing is criminal, not just immoral. Document everything. Find other victims if possible, because predators usually have multiple targets, and report it to both civil authorities and the religious institution. You deserve justice and healing. Father Michael is now in prison where he belongs. He can't hurt anyone else. The families he victimized are recovering. We're scarred but surviving, and hopefully our story prevents other predators from using faith as a weapon against vulnerable people.